Hey, guess what? The .NET Developer Days Conference is happening October 18th and 19th in Warsaw, with some great speakers and over 30 technical sessions spread over 2 days. Among them are keynotes by Scott Hunter and James Montemagno. If you can't make it to Warsaw in person, they also offer a great online option. For only €150, you can access 2 days of live-streamed conference sessions, as well as all the session recordings after the show. Check them out at developerdays.pl and take 20% off your online registration with the code ROCKS. That's ROCKS exclamation point. Welcome back to .NET Rocks. This is Carl Franklin.
And this is Richard Campbell.
And we're at CodePaLOUsa in Louisville, Kentucky.
We're in Bourbon Town.
Right. And we're still recording this August 18th. Tonight is the .NET Rocks party.
Yeah, or it was the .NET Rocks party.
Well, yeah.
Time shifting is hard.
Yeah, but here and now,
At
where
this
we
moment,
are.
We're a few hours from having our 20th anniversary party.
Yes, we are.
It's not really my 20th anniversary party. Your 20th anniversary.
Well,
I'm the new guy.
The new guy.
I'm
Come
the new
on.
guy.
Come on now. You've only been doing it for, what, 1 year less than me?
2. You started in 2002.
2 years.
I
yeah,
was a
that's
guest
right.
in 2004,
Right.
and I became co-host February of 2005. I figured I'd do 20 shows, and I was wrong.
So
Now
much fun anyway.
This is like 1811 we're recording right now.
Yeah.
And I did 1711 of them, I think. There's a few odd shows here and there.
Yeah.
So,
Well, if I hadn't said it lately, thanks for coming on board.
You're welcome. I mean, I guess I've done 94 or 95% of the shows. So
Yeah.
It's a count for something.
That's good.
I mean, it'll do.
All right, let's roll the crazy music for a segment we call Better Know a Framework.
Awesome. All right, man. What do you got?
So, just in case you're new to this little thing, it started out. Actually, it was a callback to Colbert's show, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was Better Know a District.
A district.
Yeah.
Where he walked up to people in D.C., senators and congressmen and women, and asked them if they knew something about their own district.
Yes.
And
Sometimes
obviously,
hilarity ensued.
hilarity ensued. What could go wrong, right? So it started out as a way for me to shine a little light on a dark corner of the .NET framework. This is way before .NET Core.
Yeah.
Because there's so many namespaces and things in there, so much plumbing code. And then after working through some of those, it turned into, Carl Googles something before the show.
Yeah.
And just find something interesting. So last night we were sitting around the table with some speakers, and I just happened to say, I need a Better Know framework for tomorrow. And Phil Japixi speaks up and he says, you should talk about MSpec because they just got Visual Studio integration.
Oh, wow.
And MSpec is machine specification, a context specification testing framework for C#. It's a BDD style framework that's now supported by the Visual Studio 2022 test runner, R#, TeamCity, and many others.
Wow. Okay.
So that I'm sure that means something to somebody somewhere, not to me, but it apparently is really good news.
No,
Yeah.
I'm looking through the GitHub library, and it's just a way of doing validation for machine specs.
And it makes
Part of
Phil
your
very
testing.
excited.
Well, Phil's funny that way.
He is. He gets excited about specs.
Oh, that's cool.
Test. So there you go. Know it, learn it, love it. Who's talking to us, Mr. Campbell?
Grabbed a comment off of show 1713. That's November of 2020, a while ago. Talking to Billy Hollis about the return on investment that comes from good UX design,
Right.
Which is a typical show with Billy lately. You
Yeah.
know, we've been doing shows with Billy for nearly 20 years. I think you interviewed him in the first 10 shows.
Right.
Since he was one of the catalysts for you making the show in the first place, right? That's
was,
the story
yeah.
you're always telling of Rocky and Billy arguing in X Speakers Lounge.
That's
about
right.
the early
Yeah.
.NET.
Well, we should record
those
this.
things should be recorded, right? You don't want them to get away.
Because they wrote the first book one of the first books on .NET together, and it was VB.NET, I think it was.
Sure, because that's where they were coming from.
Yeah.
Well, you guys were all trainers in VB back in the day.
Yeah.
So this comment comes from Kasem, which is a couple years ago, where he said, "Hey, this is a great episode. It's always fun to hear the UX UI discussion with Billy Hollis. Although I must say that with all the complaints and rants, sometimes you guys come across a little like Stadler and Waldorf."
What do you mean sometimes?
Sometimes.
This is our MO, man.
Sometimes.
Get off of my lawn. Welcome to Old Guys Try to Talk.
Oh, well, you know, whenever I do a Run As Radio with Paul Thurrott, it is two old guys complaining about Windows.
Yeah, of course.
Very popular complaining, but it is complaining. So his question to Billy is, do you have a recommendation for books for discussing good UX for developers and engineers? I'm familiar with Designing Interface by Tidwell, and also The Element of User Experience by Jess James Garnett. And which is more around web design, and of course About Face from Alan Cooper, Robert Riemann, David Cronin, and Christopher Noes. They're all great, but they're all big and targeting more designers than engineers and developers. So I'm looking more for a book to read with my team. We do have a team book club, which is cool. We implement UI for various apps and are looking for a book that will give a good background on good UI and how to back up or critic designers, do's and don'ts when you come up with your own design, and so on. And I'm like, geez, Kasem, you listed some good books right off the bat there. But Billy did respond back in the time. And he mentioned the book Designing with the Mind in Mind.
Oh, that's cool.
Which is from a neurobiologist named Jeff Johnson.
Wow.
And so it gets a little more into that deeper design conversation. But also Steve Krug's Don't Make Me Think.
Yep.
Classic.
Don't make me think.
Yeah.
Your website should always answer the question, what is this? In 3 seconds. Otherwise, right?
Yeah. Faster is better. And then he of course pointed out that on Billy's blog site is a section called Design Books. And there's a whole list of them there. So that's what's inspired Billy. And I'll include a list of Billy's books, not the books that he wrote, but the books that he recommends on design in the show notes.
Cool.
That's what I got. Oh, and Kasem, thank you so much for your comment, and a copy of Music to Go By is on its way to you. And if you'd like a copy of Music to Go By, write a comment on the website at .netrocks.com or on the Facebooks. We publish every show there. And if you comment there and I read it on the show, we'll send you a copy of Music to Go By. And
definitely follow us on Twitter. He's at Rich Campbell. I'm at Carl Franklin. Send us a tweet. Maybe we'll read it. If we're sitting on the toilet with nothing to read, I've already read all my comic books, I might pull up my phone and read your tweet.
I don't know if I need to know that.
Well, I had to say something.
Okay. I was going to go more down the side if it's well designed, then yeah.
Well. That's
just me. I'm like that.
You want to take over the joke job?
No.
I'm happy to.
No, you might get your own show.
We were talking last night to these same speakers about somebody who was in a workshop and complaining about, what was he complaining about? He was saying something like, why didn't you use TypeScript for that?
Yes.
And it was like 5 lines of code. And then I think it was Phil. He said it to Phil. And Phil starts in this long explanation as to why he shouldn't. I said, no. There's an easier answer. Get your own workshop. All right, enough jocularity. Let's bring on our guest, Kathryn Grayson Nanz. In 2013, Kathryn graduated with a BFA and took her first job as a junior graphic designer at a small boutique ad agency. And while she was there, her creative director warned her to never let anyone ever find out she could code, because if she did, she'd be stuck doing it forever. Well, she ignored this warning, and it turns out he was completely right, but she's never been happier. I love this bio. Kathryn currently works as a developer advocate on a wonderful team where she helps people build web applications in React, design and maintain their UI component libraries, and, wait for it, desperately attempts to stop back-end developers from writing any more CSS.
That is God's work right there. That's what that is. Thank you.
God bless you.
Yes, you're making the world a better place.
Yeah, and I am incarnate as one of those guys.
You are those people.
Who I
find myself in a CSS file and I say, I am making a mistake.
I jumped into CSS on this last project and,
3 weeks later, the boss goes, "Where's the program?" And I'm like, "I've been working on the design." He's like, "What are you doing that for?" So I hired a CSS guy. Problem
done
solved.
in a day.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like, listen, don't keep anything I've done. Destroy it all.
Actually, it was pretty good. It just took me a lot longer than somebody else.
Okay, so you were on the right path.
Yeah, sure. It just took too long.
But, you got to value others' expertise. There's a
do.
reason you have a specialist in that. It has its own skills.
Yeah. So, Kathryn, welcome to .NET Rocks.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for having me.
I'm so excited. Just enough design to be dangerous.
Yep.
How much design is that?
Ooh, not very much, as it turns out. Well, I think that's actually, not to start my rant right off the get-go, but I think that's one of those things people think you need to know a lot. You need to have gone to school for years. You need to have some kind of special eye. But I think, honestly, just getting a solid grasp of the basics will get you so far.
And browser tools.
And browser tools. And a smidgen of CSS, maybe.
Maybe.
But most of it, honestly, I think is maybe not even knowing enough to do it yourself, but knowing enough to talk to the people that you're working with.
Yeah.
Right?
I like the part of knowing enough to value that it's hard and that you want experts to work on it.
Yes.
It really is.
Yeah. That's very powerful.
And being able to communicate what you want and what you're looking for, what's working or not. I feel like that's half of the place where developers will struggle with designers.
Yeah.
You bring someone in and maybe you're not quite happy with what they've got or you want them to make an adjustment, but you just don't have the words, the language to even kind of direct in a way that feels meaningful. So that's kind of where learning just enough to be dangerous, to talk about it.
Well, to be able to communicate effectively, I really appreciate that because it's important. So I'm the business analyst. I've gathered a bunch of requirements from the customer. I'm getting ready to talk to developers. So I'm feeling like I need to get designers involved, the design involved early. What does a designer need to know about an application to be able to contribute effectively?
Definitely needs to know, first and foremost, kind of the user base and the goal of the user base. I think a lot of times when we think about design, we're thinking about the application of CSS and the colors and styles.
Sure.
But so much of it is the user experience and the flow.
Who's going to use this app?
Right. How can they get what they need from what you're building? So that's where I like to start, is kind of what's the problem that we're solving?
Yeah.
And then kind of validating the problem that we're solving.
It's sort of like borderline architecture, isn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, right away, I think two sort of classical audiences, which is I'm building an internal application, so I really probably know down to the names who are going to use this app, versus this is a public-facing app, and I don't know much about who's going to use them, or I think I don't anyway. Are we talking demographics?
I think there's some of that. I think there's also, we don't always know, right? There's a lot of, I think, assumptions that kind of work their way in. And with that can come some bias, right? And a lot of times when you bring a designer on, you might think this is the problem and this is the solution.
Right.
And sometimes that assumption about what the solution is not quite correct. And so kind of backing it up and starting with who are the users? What are they looking to do? And is this proposed solution the right one?
Sure.
It's kind of, that's where I think the design process begins.
Yeah, I almost think as an experienced designer, especially when we're talking about public-facing stuff, you would know more about defining that sort of audience.
It tends to depend. I've worked for some places that are so specialist that I've had to kind of educate myself. I did a while where I was working at a cybersecurity company, and that was really interesting, but was a world that I knew very little about.
Right.
And the first step was to figure out what a cybersecurity analyst is looking for and learn some of the terms that they're using and figure out what their goals are. And just the design knowledge that I had was not enough to solve those problems.
That's interesting. Yeah, so it's really an interesting conversation around what the customer base is, especially on the public facing side. But generally it's because they're customers. So you've got to know some things about them. But what do you really need to know about those users? Is this a accessibility issue? Is this how they're going to use the app?
All of the above.
Interesting.
For me, one of the places that I am most interested in is kind of the context of where you're using the app. I think especially now with everything, mobile on our phones or on tablets, we often come from an assumption that someone's going to be using our application sitting at a desk with a mouse and a full-size desktop screen.
Because that's what we're using to build the application.
Exactly. And more that is just
never. In my experience, it's just not
wrong.
the case. They're using their phones.
Right. And are they using it outside? Are they using it on a factory floor? Are they using it in an office? Are they using it on Wi-Fi? Or are they using data? Like all of those things are going to impact the kind of design decisions that you make.
So in this project that I was working on, there was a designer who used Figma to lay out all the screens and stuff. And then it was up to me to implement that. And that's where I spent all my time with CSS, because Figma, this particular design anyway, didn't, everything was absolutely positioned, right? So there's no responsiveness, there's no percentages, like there's none of that. So I had to translate all of that stuff into usable CSS. And, so there's an assumption on the customer's point of view that you should just download the Figma and everything should be fine. And no, it doesn't work that way.
No, design software is getting better, but it has not completely bridged that gap yet. And that's, I think, where that developer-designer communication comes in. Once you both know enough to kind of speak each other's language, just the basics, you can start to kind of ask, what's this supposed to do? And what's the padding on this supposed to look like? And
well, just setting the expectation that your precisely positioned Figma drawings are not what the web's going to render.
Yeah.
Like that, they're never going to be the same.
Yeah, I mean, they'll look... you can get them to look the same,
close,
but the CSS won't be what the absolute positioning is. Yeah.
More and more designers, I think, especially ones that have come out of college recently, have a pretty solid understanding of that, and that kind of so much of a surprising amount of front end work is taught as part of design work. I had to take a basic HTML and CSS course, and I was not doing anything computer science related. I was, a studio arts major.
It's a design course. Right?
Yeah, and that was just part of the design education. That kind of basic understanding of the CSS box model and the cascade and all of that is just part of design education now.
That's good news.
It is.
It is.
That folks are being educated on that base, those core behaviors, arguably better than most developers that have been in the field for a while.
What's interesting is that we used to see a lot of, and we still do see a lot of boot camps for developers, right? There's like those, $10,000 for a couple of months, and you go to a place and you boot camp. There are now UX design boot camps,
right,
out there that you're doing nothing but UX and UI. No implementation, no, maybe a little JavaScript, but there isn't any back end stuff to it. And those cost just as much.
Sure.
Yeah.
And, but that's more design than you need to be dangerous.
That's enough design to make a career out of.
Yeah. You're actually heading down that path. So
right.
I'm not asking every developer to do that.
Yeah. And I wonder if, they teach like, this is the line. You shall not cross the line into development, right? Or do they say, this is what you can expect when you talk to your developers? Like, I wonder if those things are built into those classes about how to interact with the developers and the back end people and the security people and all that stuff, because that all is going to impact your design decisions.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyway, just a thought.
But once you've got that sense of what the customers look like and how they're going to be using the app, I mean, are designers communicating to developers about code aspects at that point? Like how much design impacts on the way the app's going to be written?
I think it kind of depends. Ideally at that stage when I think you've finished that user research, that's something that you want to share with the developers because they're going to learn from that as well. And that'll impact some of their decisions that the designer might not think about in terms of things like if it's going to be used almost exclusively over data instead of Wi-Fi, that'll impact your kind of bundle size and things that you have to worry about there.
How does our app behave when connectivity is poor?
Right. Just for one example. I'm sure there's 20 million others.
Yeah.
But I think it's great to kind of start together and then diverge design and development and then come back together, if that makes sense.
But I'm also appreciating like everybody's going to benefit from some good user research, but it's often not done. So the fact that you hang it on the design requirement, it's like as design's going to demand for this user research.
Yep.
Don't worry, we're all going to be happier that we have it.
Yeah.
And it's worth the time before you start cracking a lot of code to have more of that information help you go down the right path.
It does. Depending on the place and whether user research is kind of part of their their process already. It can be a bit of a fight at first, but it is one that I think is absolutely worth fighting for.
Sure.
Because there's nothing worse than finishing a product and launching it and realizing that you were just wrong.
Yeah. None of the people that are using it match the way that things have been written.
That is so soul crushing.
But it's also it's for a long time, 20 years ago, it was normal that the machine you were writing the code on was very much like the machine it was going to be run on.
Yeah.
And I just don't know that folks have really caught on to, no, it's just not like that anymore.
And I think we're seeing, you mentioned earlier, diversity in terms of the users themselves.
Yeah.
And I think for a while, there was also a moderate assumption that if you were writing code, it was also the user was going to look kind of like you.
Yeah.
And more, that is not the case. Ages are going to vary greatly, demographics and experience, just technology capability, and how easily someone can navigate, a touch screen or whatever. All of that is becoming so much more wide, now that technology is so much more accessible from a financial standpoint and accessible from an actual accessibility standpoint. You don't have to be able to afford a nice high-end computer to get in on accessing the internet.
Your app is probably going to be used on a $50 Android phone.
Absolutely.
And it should work fine.
Yes.
It is running Chrome. It should be all the same. Phones are now diverse enough too that the price range is massive.
Yes.
And it can be used anywhere.
Yep.
Cell connections all over the place. And I have done projects where it's like, this will be primarily used by farmers in Uganda.
Right.
And you know what? And they've got $50 Android phones and they work perfect.
Yeah. And they deserve just as good an experience as everybody else.
And if it isn't good in that scenario, then it's really not a useful app. Those are the folks that need to use it. So it's a great conversation to have. And it is, but of course, and I'm a network guy, so right away I'm thinking about connectivity, reliability, messaging, like all of those kinds of problems.
Well, and from a design perspective, I'm thinking, right, so farmers are going to use it outside. Now you've got issues of, like brightness, color contrast. How well can you look at a screen in direct sunlight? Probably not going to be image heavy if you're downloading stuff.
Yep. Bandwidth's expensive there. Like we just presume everybody's got a gigabit, Ethernet connection and Wi-Fi 6 and 5G, and that may or may not be true. So your bandwidth demand's important. I would also think your font sizes would be bigger if that in those high contrast scenarios.
Absolutely. So
that screen a little differently.
You're approaching the whole thing differently, based on kind of that context of knowing it's going to be outside and it's going to be low bandwidth.
Would you ever bump up the default font size, or would you allow the user to do that?
I would bump it up, but you still want it to be adjustable by the user. I think you can start wherever you want. The important part is to not override browser controls.
Right.
Let the user customize as necessary.
Right. So if someone goes like, yeah, geez, that's a big, they should be able to just use the built-in browser, keyboard shortcuts.
But this almost sounds like it's the testing problem. It's like, what happens if you do turn up the resolution, I don't even know what they call it now in a browser when you turn that up from 100% to 200.
Oh, just like the zoom size?
Yeah, just that zoom size effect, because that'll make the fonts bigger.
Yeah.
It should just behave.
And that should always work. That's part of, I think, accessibility testing. But also, I think if you're user testing, you'll catch if everyone loads your page and the first thing they do is increase or decrease the font size.
Yeah.
That'll tell you right away, like, all right, this is probably too small for the average user.
Yeah.
If the first behavior we notice is everyone zooms in.
Yeah. Then it's like, okay, we could probably start with a larger font size.
Right.
Yeah. But don't override someone, because then now you actually get into vision impaired folks where their eyes work, but they don't work well enough for any default font size, and they're going to go bigger.
Right. They might zoom there. They might be using some of the magnifying features built into an operating system or a phone. There's all sorts of stuff that you don't kind of want to interfere with as much as you can help it.
Allow that stuff to work. Mm-hmm. Although, it makes the testing regimen even more and more complicated if you want to go down that path.
It is. And I think kind of the intensity of how you're testing, again, that's one of those things where it's good to know your user base. If you're building something that you know is going to be used primarily by an older age group, your chances of vision impairment gets much higher. You need to spend significantly more time doing in-depth testing there. You should be doing accessibility testing no matter what.
Sure.
But if you know that's going to be 90% of your users,
then suddenly it's a priority. And maybe we're testing all the text-to-speech stuff as well. Like, they may not be trying to read the screen. They may be trying to listen to it.
Right. Then you need to be doing something a little bit more than your kind of base level checking the box accessibility testing.
Oh, it's very fair and straightforward, but it's interesting that design quickly gets into accessibility as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you could have the most accessibly coded application, and if it's not accessibly designed, then
doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
It's not going to work.
And vice versa. You could have a beautiful, accessible design, and if it's all div soup, then
div soup. I love that.
Yeah, no, that's a good description. I've seen that page. I think I know that page pretty well.
Yeah.
I may have made that page.
I have made plenty of div soup in my time as well, but I like to think I've come through it.
Yeah. It's like, no, I know. You want to boil that down a little.
Oh, yeah.
Maintaining the metaphor.
Full course semantic meal.
That's very good. Yeah. And I'm going to interrupt for one moment for this very important message. Hey, our sponsor today is Raygun, Carl, and we've got JD Trask with us.
All right.
Hey, JD.
Howdy.
I'm going to dig into that enterprise stuff and talk about scaling websites, because I've done a lot of that, and I've logged a lot of different ways. Can you talk to me a bit about your experiences when websites get really big and tools like logging have an effect?
Do you mean the impact on, say, the cost or the overhead of having it in there?
Well, there's that part. There's also the performance aspects, too. Like logging's not free, especially at scale.
Yeah, absolutely. So Raygun itself, we've built our products to scale from, I'm starting a side project and I only want to maybe spend a couple of dollars, through to our largest customer. We have tracked the performance for 87 million concurrent users of their application.
What?
So we can kind of go full end to end in there.
Wow.
It's pretty big. Raygun processes a lot of data.
I thought my 300 users was big.
Yeah. Well, at that level, we like to think of it as, how does Raygun make sure it can scale for those customers? And we've done some really amazing work on that. We leverage a lot of the benefits that have actually come out of the .NET Core work from Microsoft. That's helped us a lot. We have .NET on the background. But for the customer, that one that had 87 million concurrent users, you can understand they were a multi-platform business. So that application was running on smart TVs, PCs, right down to almost Casio calculator level, processors. So the level of performance work we were doing ourselves to make sure that it was minimal overhead to ensure that customer was having great success with Raygun. I love that sort of work though, personally, trying to find performance optimization. So there's that element. And then of course, making sure you provide a service that provides things like inbound filters and screening to make sure you're not just collecting the noise from logs. You actually want the actionable stuff. And that's how you can manage the cost side while also at scale.
Well, you mean there's more to the metrics of logging than the size of the log file?
Look at all that data.
Yeah.
Well, we've all been there, right? There's my log file. It's 87 gigabytes in size.
Yeah. Oh, boy. I'm going to open it in Notepad and figure things out.
It's the joys of software.
Now, I really appreciate the instrumentation you have as well to help me understand what's going on inside my app and the logging that's there. And if you'd like to know more about Raygun, go to raygun.com and click on the free trial.
Beautiful.
Awesome.
And we're back. It's .NET Rocks. I'm Richard Campbell. That's Carl Franklin.
Yo.
Talking to our friend Kathryn about having enough design to be dangerous, but it sounds more like having enough design to work with designers.
Yeah, I think for most people.
This falls pretty quickly into the UX sort of, like, what's the right flow for an app?
It depends on the app.
You are correct. I can tell you've done your time in consulting, because you actually tend towards it depends, because it does.
I realize that I've hedged like so many of your questions. That's not my intent.
But it is an interesting aspect of it that we all have a basic design in our head of a way any given app, as soon as we're talking about it, how it would look. But then I watch UX designers really study an app and come up with something that I would not have thought of. And often I'm not comfortable with, but I'm not the person that's going to use it.
Right. So I think I think you're right that we all kind of have this kind of loose flow that we imagine.
Yeah.
But if you were to really sit and look at even just the apps on your phone, I bet the flow of your banking app is significantly different than the flow of Twitter, than the flow of your photo management app, any number of things, right? So we might think, login screen, homepage, whatever, it's settings and feed and whatever.
Right.
but it really depends.
Yeah. And so it's worth, just taking the time on that. And more importantly, reminding yourself you're not the person who's going to use it.
Absolutely not.
You're worried. How early do you start getting user feedback on that sort of thing when you're working with design folks? Do they try and get out there early on?
I think that's the ideal. Obviously, kind of where user testing fits in is going to depend on how the company has set up their process. I've worked some places that if they're really into the agile thing, they're not going to be user testing until they've got that MVP and they're ready to
proof of concept or something.
Right. I think it's nice to do that before you enter the development stage. Because, by the end of the design stage, you've usually got wireframes, or maybe you've got something roughed out, your basics in code, or maybe you've got that Figma prototype.
Figma drawings,
All of that stuff, the tech has gotten good enough. You can set a Figma prototype in front of someone, and it's clickable and explorable. And if they don't know it's Figma, they might not know you haven't built it yet.
Yeah,
true.
So
it's not an app. But creating that effect, just that moment of interactivity.
Right.
And see if they like it.
Even just if you've got, it's not interactive at all, there's a fair bit you can get out of putting a design in front of someone and kind of asking, what do you expect when you click on this button? What do you think this will do? Where do you think this will go? That'll validate some of the assumptions you make. I think that's probably the big thing, is that both design and development, I don't think we realize how many assumptions we are making as we go through that process.
And mostly based on the apps we've already used.
Right. And some of it's good. Some of that's learned knowledge that you acquire from years of being in the business, and that's not to be dismissed. But sometimes it's not correct, or sometimes things have changed beneath our feet.
and you're not going to know that without knowing the customer base. So we definitely worked on the right thing first, that we now know who's going to use it. And then you start working from those assumptions.
Right. And I think the earlier you can do that, the better. I think once you've got something that makes enough sense that you can put it in front of a user and start to kind of ask those guiding questions, or let them click around and see the assumptions that they're making.
Yeah, especially if they're very different from you.
Right.
Yeah.
Whether their intuition is lining up with what you've created.
Yeah. I do find the beta test class creates its own problems too, because there are people that are good at beta testing and they end up being less like the customer.
Yes.
Actually, like that's always an interesting challenge.
That is the danger of doing that, like hallway testing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Reinforce my opinion here for me, would you?
Yeah. It feels good, but it's not real effective.
But still, we get down to the point of then it gets out in the field and the person that does need to use it struggles with it.
Yeah. You need to be somebody, put it in front of people who are dispassionate about it.
Yeah, you got to find real users, and ideally ones that you have not paid to tell you nice things.
Even I would go so far as to say even ones that are hostile towards you.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Most of my best testers have been somewhat difficult to work with because they're naturally fussy folk. You just got to. It's worth it though.
Absolutely.
Somebody quoted that line back to me from one of the shows I did. It's like, you don't just want everyone to get along. You need a little friction. Nobody made steel without a little heat.
Oh, that's good.
That's good.
Yeah.
That was such a good line. I went back and found it. I did say that. All right, I'm writing that down.
Agreed. If everyone agrees with you the whole way, then you haven't. You haven't worked anything out.
People.
Yeah.
The chances that you were actually right the whole way are basically zero.
Yes.
So if everyone's still agreeing with you, you maybe need to go further. I need to find someone who disagrees. That person might be wrong, but at least.
But they'll bring up something that you hadn't thought about.
Yeah, that's what you're hoping for.
I always really like the idea of the pre-mortem, and when you're brainstorming,
right, as opposed to the postmortem.
As opposed to the postmortem. Yeah, no, you sit down before you've built anything, and you think, how are the ways this could go wrong?
Right.
And you will find an amazing number of ways to tank your own idea.
Yeah. And some people would call that pessimism, but it could also be called wisdom.
Yeah.
Like you are looking at the possibilities at least.
I think it's really easy to consider the happy path is usually what you hear in UX design.
Right.
Happy path.
So when everything goes smoothly and the user knows just where everything is and they want to do exactly what we've built for them to do.
Yes.
But that is not the normal path.
No.
Right?
No, even Apple got trapped with that. You're holding it wrong. Remember Antenna Gate?
Right.
Yeah. No, you're using my app wrong.
Yeah.
That's not a good answer.
Yep.
So, there should be a happy path.
Yeah.
The question is, are people likely to find it? How hard is it to get to?
Right. And what happens when they inevitably step off of it?
Yeah.
Do you have paths that route them back on?
Get them back to the happy place.
Or in UX design, there's something called desire paths, which sounds really weird.
Interesting.
But it's like if you've
That's
ever
what we want to happen, maybe.
It's actually when users create their own path that goes. If you don't have a path, they will make their own.
You're right.
Basically.
Okay.
So if you've ever been in like a park or a college campus where they've got sidewalks,
Yes.
you know,
And then you have that strip of lawn worn completely out.
called a desire path.
Yeah.
Because that's
Actually where they wanted to go, and they're not going to follow your silly patch of concrete.
right.
They're
Like,
just going to take the shortest route to where they actually want to go.
that's
Yeah,
nice
that's
that you
right.
think the grass looks good there, but it's actually not convenient.
Given no direction or information on which to make a decision, humans will just make stuff up.
But even when shown directions, but it's not the fastest way to where they want to go, they're still going to walk across the grass.
Yeah, that's the point, isn't it?
Yeah.
Users will find ways to use your app in ways you never imagined that they would. So
It's like, I know it's going to crash here, so I do this thing, then I crash it,
Yeah.
and then come back in and continue on. It's like,
the
this
work-
could have been submitted as a bug. I could have fixed that. I don't know. I'm working fine.
they found a workaround,
Yeah.
and that's just part of their process now. And if you let that go for too long, you'll actually have more trouble when you try to fix it.
Yeah.
Because you've now disrupted somebody's
An
workflow.
efficient workflow. That's funny. Yeah. Therein lies the question. It's like, should I just lay concrete over the worn out grass?
Yeah, I mean, I think a little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's one of the clearest kind of ways that a user will tell you what they're trying to do, you know? And I think, yeah, ideally, right, the solution is you rework the whole pathway system, but that's not realistic, right?
Right.
So if you can find a way to pave that path, quote unquote,
Yeah.
that's a pretty solid
It's
Band-Aid
not
kind
a
of
bad
solution.
strategy. But that's direct customer feedback now. So we've gotten an app out into the field enough that we're watching workflows. I mean, how do you even do that?
So you can do it kind of formally and informally, right? So presumably there's some kind of data collection that you're seeing depending on the app, you know, in
Right.
terms of if people are storing things or saving things or whatever, you can kind of see what features are being made use of and what's not, how many people go to this page versus over here.
Right.
And you can start to track those things kind of quietly.
Yeah.
But you can also do kind of serious user testing where you bring people in and you're watching screens, or you're seeing kind of heat map stuff of where cursors are lingering and paths people are taking. And you can just talk to people,
Yeah.
you know?
No, they start actually gathering it. Although I really like that instrumentation approach, that because then you're no longer filtering a set. It's like of the X many thousands of people that are using this app, 25% of them go from here to here to here to here to here.
Exactly.
This was a route that we planned, and okay, that's good. 25% are on the happy path.
Right.
Let's talk about the other 75%.
Exactly. Right. If you assume everyone will get to, you know, this page through that button and you're finding that button never gets clicked.
Never gets clicked. It's like,
Then-
but that page is getting used. What's
right.
going on?
Something else is happening.
No, that's great. Yeah. And this is a very DevOps like conversation then too, because now we're getting into, I'm collecting feedback from people who are using the app and then feeding it into the design process to say, now we can rev the design to, I know the term. Scott Stansfield will use it. Easements, right? I want to move the workflows towards the easements, the path that people are actually taking.
Yep.
Yeah. That was a Vertigo thing back in the
That's
day.
right, yeah,
He was
yeah.
always big on that design element of figuring out how people actually get their work done and make that the fastest route.
Yeah.
It's good to move down that. But the question is, how quickly can you get there? Like, that's a real end-to-end kind of problem. Like, I almost want to have a minimal feature set built and get quickly out into the field and start gathering that information.
And I mean, I think that's where that kind of iterative, agile type process
Yeah.
comes from, right? You build something, you put it in front of someone, you get the feedback, you iterate small
little
feature
further.
by small feature. You know,
Add a
there's,
few more people, start broadening the utilization,
right.
and get good at collecting that information and studying it. I feel pretty dangerous.
I'm feeling just enough to be dangerous.
But it's also interesting to think that, and again, I'm falling in the technical side because it's what I tend to do, that these are useful things for the design folks.
Absolutely.
And they help, and we're helping with design when we can constantly measure it like that.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people think specifically about design in almost an art sense, and they're thinking about colors and, you know, typography choices and layout. All of those are super important.
Sure. And they get done up front and then you can go away. We don't need you anymore.
Sometimes.
I just don't think it's true, right?
Yeah,
It feels like
not always. And all of those choices should be based on research, on that user information.
Right.
Those are going to inform all of those choices as well as all of your development choices. And design's an iterative process as well.
right. The same with the software is.
Do you have one of those coffee mugs that says CSS is awesome
And it
with a
breaks
box
out of the
around
box?
half of that
Yeah.
sentence?
I don't have one, but I have seen them.
Yes, we all need one.
Yeah. I mean, that should be enough for developers to stay away from CSS. I've been there. I've seen that. I've done that. Oh,
But I think it's also
Frustrating.
a great part of understanding design to think this is an iterative process. So this is our first attempt, and we're making the following assumptions
Right.
based on the data we've gathered. And now let's go back as the app gets more mature, we're feeding back into that set of assumptions. And where were we right? Where were we wrong?
Yeah.
Improve the design, iterate again.
So it's a skill set and a science, and we loop over it kind of the same way development is. I think that's the trick, is once it doesn't feel like magic anymore,
It's hard work like everything else.
Right.
But feel the same way about performance tuning. We can't performance tune in advance. We've got to actually get the app out in the field and figure out where it's struggling and then tune those bits.
Yeah.
So I can imagine design is just not any different.
Not really.
You're going to do the same thing. I mean, that's good, right?
Yeah.
In the sense that, hey, everybody's job is hard and they're all important. And the only way we make good apps is by doing all of them.
I think to me, the other thing that's nice about it is that it makes it learnable, because I think that's the other thing when there's that feeling of like magic or like, you so often hear people be like, we give it to the designers and they work their magic or they make things pretty or whatever. And it just puts this big black cloud over and you're like, all right, the designers will do their thing.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of in this black box and it feels mysterious and whatever, but anyone can do it.
I've been treated that way as a developer too.
Right.
Right. That they'll just, the dev will do his thing and then everything will be fine. It's like, no.
Right.
No. We'll make a couple of steps and we'll find some problems and we'll iterate.
Right.
Right? Well, Beat Performance Tuner was the worst for that. It's like, you've got a button that just makes the site go fast. It's like, I'm going to find the current choke point. We're going to find a way to ease that choke point, and then we're going to find another choke point.
Right. That feeling when they're like, you just have you got the
You've
easy
got the
button, right?
magic,
You're
yeah.
like, oh, I wish.
I wish. It's like, first we're going to test. Really? You're not just going to write some code? Nope.
No.
First we're going to test. If I don't have benchmarks in the first place, I have no idea what we've done and whether it's made any difference.
Right.
It's very unmagical. All right, good. That I'm renaming the show. It's like taking the magic out of design.
I like that.
Because it's important, right? You just figure it's an iterative process. It's hard work too.
Yeah.
It takes certain things into account, and it has an effect over the whole app,
Absolutely.
one way or the other.
Yeah. And step one, take out the dumb. If I learned anything from Billy Hollis, it's like all of his pictures of like elevator buttons where you have a round light button next to a round number and people push the number, not the button.
Yeah.
And the one is worn because everybody pushes the one number. And there's no button on
That's
one
not the button.
It's next to the number.
Yeah. That's a desire path. That's what that is.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
I have almost eased that number right off of it.
You've learned what the button should
But
look like
not
now.
Yeah.
Yeah, the button should have the number on it. It should,
That's that simple.
then we can show all the pictures of the push-pull on doors. It's like, look, the same handle on both
Right.
sides of the doors, and the door doesn't swing both ways.
Yeah.
Excellent.
How frustrated are we all with sinks in public restrooms that you have to put your hand under and then nothing happens.
Yeah.
And it's like
Moving your hand around.
You feel
It's
like you're
hello.
dealing with stupid people. Like you're dealing with stupid things.
Sensors.
Yeah. I hate it. Can't stand it.
And now it all comes down to they just want the water to turn itself off.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's really what it was about.
Yep. Oh, the best ones are when you only get 5 seconds of water
And it shuts off.
and it shuts off and you hold your hand there and nothing happens.
Yeah.
You have to go out
and
with
back
your
in.
hands and then back in. And so there's all these people like look like they're flapping their arms at, don't get me started. Take out the dumb. Step one.
Design is hard.
It's hard.
Well, certain things are easy, like those. I talk also about having in a bathroom, having the paper towel dispenser right over the toilet. So everybody puts their drippy, wet hands right over the toilet seat. Yeah.
yeah.
Oops.
You're going to put wet hands somewhere. You should think about where that location is.
You should think about where that's going to go, preferably over the sink.
Yeah. Just saying.
Yeah.
Any other design issues you run into? I'm still waiting for a good Kathryn rant.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Let's go.
A rant. Let's see. I'm trying to think of one. I'm sure I would have one if I hadn't just been asked.
I just ruined everything.
Terrible.
Yeah. But it's common frustrations designers have with developers.
I would say I think actually probably the kind of lack of knowledge, right? Is like we talked a little bit about, designers now are so much of the design education is that idea of learning kind of basic CSS, the box model, some of that.
Right.
So often as a designer, they're coming to the table already knowing not everything, not how to code, but enough to kind of converse. And that is so rarely the other way around.
Yeah.
And it's like, if I'm trying to talk about like, oh, we need to increase the contrast here, and you got to go all the way back and explain how contrast works and what contrast ratios are and what value is and how color works, and that's maybe a big example, right? You might not have to go all the way back that far, but to have to step through kind of the basics in order to say, I need these to look more visually different for this reason.
Right.
Or sometimes the assumption that, the design stuff isn't super important. You can kind of fudge the details.
We can fix that later.
And sometimes you can, and sometimes you can't. But if you don't have the basic design knowledge, it's harder to differentiate between like, oh yeah, this is just there because we had to put something there, or this is there and it's really important. And we actually, the spacing on this is crucial and the spacing on that is not so crucial.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. What I learned about contrast, I learned from Mark Miller. And he basically says that, you want to avoid having an overwhelming screen where everything is equally important, right? So contrast and color are just two variables that you can use to stress what is the important thing on this page.
Yeah.
And what is the important information? So the important information is going to have higher contrast. The less important information, like the lines around the grid, should be lighter and in the background. Things like that.
That's called creating a visual hierarchy.
Yeah.
And it's kind of that. There's a couple ways you can do it through color, through size, through placement mainly. Yeah. And it's the idea that using those design tools, we can kind of direct where we want people's eyes to go first. Right. Things that are bigger and have more contrast from the background and take up more space and do this. The eye will go there first, and we can kind of rank things by relative importance and guide the user's eye through the page based on that hierarchy that we create.
One of the variables that I'm really glad didn't take hold is motion, like animation, like buttons that vibrate to get your attention. Sometimes on the phones, like on iPhones, you'll see stuff like that. But
all the old Vista UI stuff with those big icons, they're literally rolling and flipping. It's like, touch me. No, touch me.
Yeah,
touch me. It's like, you need to go away.
I'm glad that died a very well-deserved death.
Well, we've been dealing with so much visual noise for so long. I remember, and the skeuomorphic designs, like making stuff that look like leather and things like that. Right. I kind of like where we are in a design period right now, where things are a lot less noisy and a lot clearer and simpler.
It feels silly, but you'll almost always start, like new trends you'll see will almost always start with that skeuomorphism because it's something to latch onto, right? And like when you think about like really early, some of like early Windows stuff, where it looked like a living
floppy
room. And
disk.
There was
I'm talking about like Bob.
Like Bob.
Right.
And, bookcases with literal, books or icons, because when people were so new to this idea of computing, they needed something that they knew to orient.
Right.
And the iPhone started out that way, trying to create 3D effects and realistic textures and things until we sort of acknowledged, no, it can be simpler than that.
Right. But it almost had to be that way at the beginning because there was so much with the iPhone that was new. That was entirely touchscreen and, keyboards with no buttons. I remember so many people wondering whether that would really stick or not. Yeah. So you have to, when you're doing things that are disruptive in one way, you have to do things that are grounding.
I got to think the next set of devices, which I suspect will be the visors, augmented reality and things like that, will be interesting to see skeuomorphism appear in there to try and make it more familiar.
I mean, I think to an extent you do, right? Because a lot of those you get hands.
Yes.
Right? But do you need hands?
Yeah.
That's something that
right now
used.
It's the visual cue while it's new.
Exactly.
That we need.
What is the next floppy disk icon for skeuomorphic? Because there's a generation of people who have no idea what those are.
A lot of them have moved away now. I see the download icon a lot with like an arrow pointing down.
Yeah.
Or like a file folder with an arrow, you know. But once people kind of are okay with the idea, you can start to abstract.
Right.
And that often makes it simpler, which is nice. But if you had jumped to that, you know, when computers were new and the save icon was just an arrow pointing down.
Yeah, I don't know if it mean anything to anyone.
Right.
All right, here's one. Hamburger menu, yes or no?
That's a weird one because objectively, it's really not great, right? Like, and everyone, there's 20 million of them, right? The hamburger and the like kebab and whatever.
The kebab? I haven't seen a kebab menu.
the dots, right? The dots that line up.
Oh, the dots that line up. Like
but anyway.
That's called a kebab, huh?
But we have basically forced that opinion on the general public, and now it has become...
It's become a thing.
We've forced people's hands on that one. That's not a good design, but we've made it that way.
But it's common enough now that people know. Click on the 3 lines.
Right.
Yeah. When you were looking for something.
So yeah.
We could have a rotating, you know, buzzing kind of, hey, look at me, punch me, touch me.
But that's also a sign that like your design isn't good, that you have to put all that energy into attracting attention to it.
Right.
That it's not obvious.
Right. There are other things. It's always better to bring the other things down than try to push something
I'm looking
else
at
up.
my Gmail app in the browser right now, and at the very top left is the hamburger menu.
Yeah.
And, you know, hey, if Google's doing it.
We have brute forced our way into hamburger menus everywhere.
But then there's another one, like for all of the apps that they have, is like a tic-tac-toe screen. It's like 3 layers of 3 lines of 3 dots.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like a gallery screen. And then there's the gear.
The gear
is like settings.
I get that. That's actually a good one, I think.
Icons are, I mean, that's a whole person's job.
Thing.
Yeah.
But it's certainly something a developer has to come back to design and say, hey, we're making this. Where do we put the settings? What does the icon look like? Where do we, do the next context menu? Like all of those things are part of the equation and need to be part of the conversation.
And it's super challenging if you're trying to create an icon for something that's not a normal.
That doesn't fit.
Right. Something unique to your application.
Your icon's never going to be as good. It's always going to be worse.
Yeah.
It's one of those things you totally take for granted. Like if you take an icon and zoom it up in an editor and really look at the little details that are in that icon that are just not obvious until each pixel's the size of your thumb.
It's incredible.
And then you suddenly realize, wow, there's a lot of thought in here, and this is why your icon sucks.
It is.
That's the name of the show. This is why your icon sucks. It is incredibly hard to design for such a small space.
For an 8x8 or a 16x16 pixel with a limited number of colors that works for all vision capabilities and so forth. It's astonishing.
People talk about logo design in and of itself is hard, right? In and of itself, it's got to be pretty small. I mean, I'm even looking, at the stuff on this table. Logos are itty bitty. Got to be readable from a distance. Got to be unique. Got to be.
Hire an expert. You're not going to do it.
You're not going to do it. And an icon is like an eighth the size of that.
Yeah. It's amazing. Kathryn, so much fun to talk about this stuff. And if anything, just to carry away, this is harder than you think. Count on the experts. Ask them questions.
Yeah.
Will you come back and talk to us again?
Absolutely. I'd love to.
All right. And until then, we'll see you next time on .NET Rocks. .NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net and produced by Plop Studios, a full-service audio, video, and post-production facility located physically in New London, Connecticut, and of course in the cloud. Online at pwop.com. Visit our website at dotnetrocks.com for RSS feeds, downloads, mobile apps, comments, and access to the full archives going back to show number 1. Recorded in September 2002. And make sure you check out our sponsors. They keep us in business. Now go write some code. See you next time.
Got transmitter banned by the FCC.